we're going to be talking about a subject that I feel like most people avoid talking about.
In this culture, we have so many taboos.
We try to avoid this kind of words.
The Confucian told us we should tell those things auspicious to the older adults.
I'm a doctor. I'm not a liar.
Hello and welcome to Crossover. I'm Yi Shu in Beijing, and today I'm joined by my special guest host and an old friend of Crossover, psychologist Paul Yin. Thank you. Welcome back to Crossover.
Well, I'm glad to be back.
It's great to have you. Now, Paul, today we're going to be talking about a subject that I feel like most people avoid talking about, and that's the subject of death.
Yes.
Yeah, it tends to especially be a bit taboo amongst the Chinese culture and Chinese people. But I often find that it's when we discuss death, that's when we feel the most alive, and we feel that that's talking and discussing death makes us think about how we want to live our life. I mean, how do you perceive this?
Well, in this culture, we have so many taboos, thousands of years. We build up so many things that the culture requests people to follow certain rules, and including, for instance, death. It's a topic that you don't talk about because it's bad luck, and it brings people to think about things that are negative. That's how everybody seems to think. So they try to avoid it, and in most days try to keep a positive, harmonious outlook. But however, when you have to face it, when there's no way to avoid it, that's when we have difficulties.
Right.
And that's why it's important that we discuss this beforehand, right, instead of facing it in such a helpless and unprepared manner.
Of course. And today, joining us today are three doctors who, even though they are trying to preserve life every day, they are also facing death with their patients every day. I'd like to welcome Zhang Xing from Tsinghua Changgeng Hospital.
That's right, yeah.
And we have two doctors, Dr. Ning and Dr. Zhang Ning from Peking Union Medical College Hospital. Welcome to Crossover.
Glad to be here.
So, we're talking about the Chinese people's attitudes towards death. The three of you are doctors, practicing doctors here in Beijing. How do you feel like Chinese people accept or maybe don't accept?
Actually, as a surgeon, as a urologist, and in our daily practice, we try to avoid this kind of words because the patient, they just want to seek for help. Both the doctors and also the patients, they try to avoid this. They want to see the patients to totally recover from the hospital. But I think it's very important, actually, to sit down and really think some of the things behind it. We treat the patient, but I also need to think about serious. When death comes, I think. Yeah.
Well, obviously there is a point in time in everybody's life when we have to start thinking about the end of life.
Yeah.
And I know Dr. Ning and Dr. Zhang Ning, both of you are physicians that specialize in geriatrics, so you work with a lot of senior citizens. Yeah. Tell me about your patients' experiences with this type of discussion.
I have been a physician for almost 18 years, and I have been an oncologist for 12 years. So it's since before I go to the geriatric department. In those years, I can remember that most of the time I talk with people about their disease, the cancers, the pain. But I never have the strength to begin this topic about death.
Dr. Zhang Ning is nodding his head in agreement.
Yeah, I quite agree with my teacher's opinion, and I also am trying to avoid this because in the Chinese culture, the Confucian told us we should tell those things auspicious to the older adults as a filial duty. So we say well-being, welfare, living longer, like an auspicious cloud in ancient times. We will say. he's not dying, he's going away, driving the dragon.
Right.
So
the
it's
idea of
never
longevity is
happens.
something that
Yeah.
is so ingrained in Chinese culture. But Paul, is this very different from the experience that we might find in the West? Because, I mean, when you're sick, I mean, even in the West, we'll go to our doctors and we'll say, do whatever you can to save me, you know, to treat me. I want to be cured. But is there a different experience in China than in the West?
I think very much so. I think in the West, it is a more individualistic society where a person is mostly responsible for their own life and death. But China and most of the Orient is a more collective cultural background. So in this culture, your life is more than just your life. It is part of a clan that could be your family, your extended family, maybe including your social circle. That's all part of your life. So for you to have longevity, it reflects positively on the group that you also represent, the group that you are from. So that's also one of the reasons why the other people in your group want you to live a long time, and they want to save you even when it seemed like a hopeless pursuit.
So is longevity more important or is quality of life more important?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think also in a collective culture, people try to support each other, and a lot of people, especially the more peripheral people, they really don't have too many opportunities to show this. And a lot of people do use this end-of-life moments to almost like exhibit their love for each other. So I'm trying to save this person. I'm going to cook him the best last meal or whatever. So everybody try to do something.
Whatever it takes.
And and for someone from an more individualist society, if you are confronted with this, it's almost like you're trying to love me to death, and I can't take this anymore.
Right.
Yeah, but that's the difference between the two cultures.
Now, tell me one thing, because I've encountered this a lot since being in China, and actually with my own family that is Chinese in heritage, is that a lot of Asians, when a parent is sick and maybe terminal, they don't want to tell the parent. You know, they keep it, they say, oh, we're going to keep this a secret, you know, that my mother or my father is about to die.
80% or 90% of the relative of the patients, they just ask doctors to try to hide the truth. I think it's a different culture, because when I was in UK, I think most of the patients want to know the truth themselves. They make the judgment themselves. Just as Dr. Paul said, I think it's very interesting. Each time before the operation, when we talk about and sign the consent with the patient, I usually give them 1 or 2 days, because they maybe have 3 sons, 3 daughters. They have to sit together, get an agreement instead of the patient. So usually I give them some days before the operation even to get agreement. Then I can do the operation. Otherwise, I will be a little bit worried about if something happened.
I can imagine that gets very difficult. Because a patient might have a lot of different family and relatives. Do
So
they
it's,
often agree, or have you had instances where the relatives disagree with each other?
Years before, I will agree with the family members. Okay, that's an infection. So when I go to see the patient at the bedside, and the patient asks, what about my disease? I think, oh, it's an infection years ago. But now, when I have doing the palliative care things for 3 or 4 years, I realize that I'm a doctor. I'm not a liar. So I'm the only origin that the patient can get the truth. So I try to communicate with the family members about why it is so important to tell the truth.
Right.
Why? Because the time for the patient is too short. She needs some time to do the very important thing. So after I say these things, most of the family members can agree with me, and then we will go back to the family and have a meeting or thinking about these things, and then they can do something more.
This gets into a very philosophical question about preparing for end of life. And it's not only for the person who's going through this process, but it's also, like you said, it's preparing all of the relatives and the people who love this person. Dr. Ning was talking about how years ago she would tell them that it was an infection and they didn't have this time to prepare. But now, now she's trying to advise families to, to let the patient know so that they have this time to prepare. What's the difference when it comes psychologically?
Well, I think for Dr. Ning, is her years of experience has prepared her to be able to face the issue of death much better. And the difficulty we have with the family members and with the patient himself and also with the other doctors is that they have difficulty facing the issue. It's not the patient himself that is having the difficulty, it's just the people around that have difficulty. And that's reflected in how they deal with the situation. And in the Chinese culture, because we are a collective society where we try to make decisions by consensus, everybody agree. And how can everybody agree? There's only one way, which is the people who are, let's say, a little bit more advanced in their thinking, they have to pull back. We have to go with the one who is the slowest, who is furthest behind. And so if there's one person who says, I don't care, I'm going to do whatever I can to save my mother and to have her live even for one more day, then the rest of the family member are not going to start an argument and say, no, don't save her. So everybody else just give back.
But Dr. Zhang Ning, do you feel like in those instances where you're not telling the patient what is actually happening, do you feel like that patient actually does know, even though they haven't been verbally told?
Yeah, actually, I think patients, they're very sensitive. They can capture many of the key information through our dialogue, even through our eye contact, through our other emotions. They will know about it. Frankly speaking, when I was practicing in the internal medicine department, I will agree with the members' opinion that, yeah, we tell the truth. So we will encourage the patient. And don't worry, it's nothing so bad. It's just something, if you abide by the doctor's directions and take medications, you will get recovered. Yeah.
Yeah, there are ways to continue to encourage them to fight against.
That's what I do years ago.
Well, I think a lot of people don't realize that verbal communication is only a very small percentage of the information that we communicate with each other.
Absolutely.
But also pheromones. When everybody is feeling sad and grief, we send out chemical signals that people can pick up. And you don't need to be very smart to pick up those signals. And frankly, doctors who lie to the patient, the doctor themselves don't want to lie.
Right.
The family want them to lie. So these doctors are not good liars.
Right, right. Because you want to tell the truth, right?
I'm not a good liar.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, the reason why we're having this conversation today is because the conversation about end of life is starting to change here in China. And there's a concept that's called palliative care or hospice care, two different concepts, but related to the same thing that has been developing in the West and has now reached China and is starting to develop. So when we come back, we're going to talk more about palliative care and hospice care, which is really about helping patients go through this process pain-free. Please stay tuned. Is it giving up?
In the Chinese society, people don't just live for themselves.
We need specialists, but we also need education to all the doctors.
I think still take a long time to go.
And welcome back to Crossover. In the last segment, we started talking about this concept, which is palliative care. And related to that is hospice. Can you tell me exactly what palliative care is?
In China, it began from 1988. At that time, we had heard about the conception about end-of-life care. But these kinds of things developed slowly in China. I think so, mainly because economic things were not so good enough to think about this thing.
Right.
But recent years, more and more cities, they have places specialized for palliative care.
There are two aspects of this. One is palliative care and the other one is hospice.
Palliative care is the care that want to promote to get the quality of life of the patient to be better, and as well as their family members.
And how does that differ from hospice?
It's a continuous process. We told palliative care should be embarked on at the moment the terminal, a serious condition has been diagnosed. But hospice care is relatively late stage of palliative care. That is to say, in general, when the life expectancy of the patient is within 6 months. And this time, the main focus should be hospice care.
Palliative care was first introduced in the 70s at a hospital called St. Christopher's Hospital in the UK. We have a video clip from them. Let's take a look.
I'll be a window in your home was the promise given to me in 1948 by David Tashma, a Pole from the Warsaw Ghetto, and one of the patients who are the real founders of the hospice where I work. His £500 for this window was the first gift and gave us a symbol of openness, of looking in and of looking out. The whole building speaks of welcome and a space for people to be themselves.
If we consider the role of St Christopher's since it was opened in 1967, we have to say that Dame Cicely changed the practice of medicine and the care of the dying significantly everywhere.
Hospice is a way of caring for people at the end of life, which can indeed be done in a building with beds, but can equally well be done in the home, or in a nursing home, or in a hospital bed. Wherever the person happens to be, they can be receiving hospice care.
St Christopher's has really led the way in defining the philosophy of hospice care, that care needed to encompass the family as well as the patient, and that really good community life needed to engage volunteers as well as paid staff.
We know that the scale of need is growing in a very predictable way. We know that giving people the right knowledge, skills and confidence to care for the people that matter to them is the best thing that we can do.
We've got a lot to be proud of, but we have got huge potential to do even more. Our ambition to educate is not only directed to professionals. We want to educate, to teach whole communities who might want to look after people who are dying or bereaved.
We know that palliative care started in the 70s in the UK, but it's just starting here in China. When did it start developing? Because I kind of see maybe with more incidences of diseases like cancer, and maybe with the aging population here in China, you're seeing a greater need for something like palliative care. Would you agree?
Palliative care, actually, we think that if the patients have a life-limiting disease, for example, the patient is diagnosed as colon cancer with liver metastasis, even though he can live almost 3 years, we think he's life-limiting. So I think these kinds of patients, they can do, for example, chemotherapy, but they need palliative care to help him to go to the end peacefully.
But is this considered, I could see some detractors saying something like, oh, this is giving up. Is it giving up? Something like hospice?
On the contrary, it's not giving up. It's very active attitude to treat the patient. I want to make you comfortable. Right. I want to make you feel peaceful.
I heard that, again, regarding death and end of life, there is some sort of, I want to call it like a rite of passage amongst Chinese. Like you have to suffer. You have to go through that pain. It displays bravery. If at the end you're really suffering and you're in a lot of pain, that psychologically that helps them, show to their family and their relatives that they really fought, to stay alive.
Well, that's another example of what I say, that in the Chinese society, people don't just live for themselves. But now I think a lot of the patients who are not only accepting, but actually demanding palliative care are the same people who perhaps some years ago witnessed their parents going through their end of life and how they suffered and how their children in later years reflect upon it and have regrets and wish that it didn't happen that way, and they don't want to go through the same thing.
Right.
And so that's why I think it's also very important that Dr. Ling especially mentioned about educating the family members and helping them so that they don't go through the same again.
How do you approach your patients, or I guess your patient's family, when it comes to palliative care? You know, how do you introduce this concept to them?
We do not need to tell the patient or the family that you should go to the hospice. We just do this palliative care things. No, you can live in this hospital, the same hospital, in same wards,
Right.
being cared by the same physician.
But we're going
provide.
to ease your suffering.
Yeah, we provide palliative care. We do not say this is palliative care.
So this is becoming pervasive not only in the big cities in China, but also in smaller cities. There's a particular city in Henan called Zhengzhou, where there's a hospital that is really leading a lot of palliative care efforts. We went there and visited to see what their program is like in palliative care. Let's take a look.
It looked like any other city hospitals in China, except most patients here are in their final stages of life. We were prepared to be surrounded with grief and sorrow, but we were wrong.
不是针对肿瘤，它主要是针对这个生活的质量，这方面出发，所以它给病人让病人少痛苦。
因为在其他医院经常会就说他住个3天他就想出院，在这里还好。
我来这以后呢，我看我精神状态比以前好多了。
There was no doctor's office to be found in this hospital's palliative care center. The only workstation available was shared by doctors and nurses. Dr. Li Ling, director of this palliative care center, told us they had one office before they turned it into a ward. This allowed for more patients to be admitted. At the same time, it encouraged doctors to always be on the floor. And her career in palliative care was driven by a heart-wrenching encounter with a patient.
I still remember one morning when I came into the patient's ward. A lady, she's the children patient. She asked me, "Who can help me?" So I asked her, "What can I do for you?" She answered, "Let me die. Nobody can help her, and we can do nothing at that time."
She re-evaluated her mission as a doctor upon this incident. Consequently, she gave up her promising career as a surgeon to become a physician in palliative care. In 2011, she went to the US to study palliative care. In the following 6 years, she founded the first center of palliative care in Zhengzhou City. At first, it treated only patients with advanced cancer. Now it serves all types of patients and is chosen by a growing amount of patients and their family members. Although she believes it still takes more time for the greater public to accept this type of treatment.
这一次呢，我们从 ICU 转到这边来，我们也怕别人说，哎呀，一说你不愿意进校，你怎么怕花那个钱了？啊，你最后能抢救能多活一天了，你怎么不采取那些抢救措施啊？等等。
Despite all these challenges, Dr. Li and her team continue their work in palliative care and hospice. She is encouraged by the growing amount of patients and their family members' decision to seek help for quality death and motivated by their decision to donate organs and bodies. She sees hope for this type of treatment and believes that one day the discussion of this solemn topic will no longer be a taboo.
Now, this last family member, he was talking about letting the elderly, be prepared and pain-free, end of life. But of course, this is not only for elderly people. This is also for young people who have serious, and incurable conditions.
Yesterday, I was asked about a question about, is there some place in Beijing that for the end of life of a very small child? I said, how old is he? It's 1 month. 1 month diagnosed as
Down syndrome.
AML, acute, it's leukemia, and the family members. I think it's the family members, it's the mother and the father of the small child. They need help and support. Just as the last family members say, we are afraid that someone else will say, you're not so good, son. Why not? Why don't you transfer your parents to the ICU? That's the best place for him.
Right.
If some specialists tell him that you choose the best way for your father, you let him come out from ICU and come to this peaceful place, and we try to release his pain, relief, and let him have the opportunity to stay with his family members. That's the best thing,
Right. Is that, social pressure plays a big role in this, right?
Absolutely. Within the family, and also, especially now in the age of social media, sometimes even strangers would put pressure on you.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, I think this is a typical hospital in China. And I'm surprised and happy to see we have this kind of hospital now. Because as a doctor, usually I offer lots of information, necessary information to the patient who cannot be cured. And I think Chinese people are very smart. And also the relatives, they know immediately what I mean. Although I didn't mention any words regarding death or not. But the patient will just take them back home, or we didn't have the follow-up. It's a pity. I don't have the follow-up of the second patient. What's the future? But I think it's a pity because we lack the care of this kind of patient who cannot receive for the treatment.
Right.
I think most of them go back home, and so that's why we sit here today. And I think we need more hospitals who can offer the hospice care. I don't think in Beijing, in big hospital, they can offer this kind of facilities because they have too many patients to treat and cure.
Right.
So that's why we needed a hospital like this in different cities who can admit more patients and offer more hospice care, I think, in the future.
I did read some data that by the year 2050, I think there'll be 400 million senior citizens here in China, and there really is not enough healthcare facility for them. And currently, in terms of hospice care, it's less than 1% that they can serve of the population who has cancer.
It's not easy. In this situation now in China, it's not easy for these kinds of hospitals to live. You just receive some end-of-life patients. How can they go on?
Right, to survive, you mean?
Yeah, the hospital cannot survive,
Right.
So I think it's even more important for all the doctors to know, no matter it's small hospitals, middle-level hospitals, or the big hospitals. All the doctors and nurses, they know if the patient is going to die, is on the way to their ends, what should we do? That's
right, so you're
important.
saying every single doctor should be educated in palliative care, not just palliative care doctors or hospice doctors, right? Or doctors who specialize in geriatrics, right?
We need specialists, but we also need education to all the doctors and to all the citizens.
I'm just curious because the three of you are promoting palliative care, not only in your own hospitals, but also throughout China. What was it that you experienced? There must have been some sort of personal moment or touching moment where you've seen a family go through palliative care that made you really believe in this. Is there something that you can share with us?
I have many stories, many. Just before I come here, I go to see a patient in a ward in a hospital to do a consultation. I spent 1.5 hours with the patient. Just sit there and listen. I say, you do not like us to draw your blood so often. You do not do so many examinations. Okay, we will respect you in the future. And the old man, 72, he cried. I feel so good when you say so. You can respect me in the future.
Right. It's about respecting my will and respecting what I want.
When I say these things to his daughter cried. Yes, I know what we should do. I will talk about this with my elder brother. My brother wants to do a lot of things on my father, to do chemo, to use the best medication. Then I will talk with him and I tell him what's most important to my father. And then the daughter hugged me for a long time. She cried and I cried too. And after that, I feel the relaxation on her face.
I'm sure you've had a lot of patients as well as patients' relatives who just open up their heart to you.
Yes.
For, you just said, it's the first time that you had met them.
First time, yeah.
And yet they're telling you everything.
Yeah. I think Dr. Ning mentioned the importance of educating the doctors. I think if we go one step further, we really need to educate the general public. And right now, doctors like Dr. Ning is doing this. I think with time, when we have more people doing this, educating the public, it will bring about a change.
It does require a shift in thinking, or attitude, both at the doctor and the medical professional level, as well as at that patient, the consumer level, right?
I think that's right, because actually I think this is a huge task, because they need the support both from doctors, nurses, and also from the psychologists, from the social workers, and from lots of people, and even relatives. So I think we cannot just counting on a new hospital who is solely for this kind of job. We can carry out hospital care at home, in the hospital, and everywhere, I think. But you have to get the concept. This needs to be understood by most of the people of the society, I think. So I think still take a long time to go.
Right. There are groups that are starting to develop within the community that are promoting the idea of living wills and this kind of end-of-life planning. When we come back after this short break, we're going to have a volunteer and talk to us about what she does. Please stay tuned. My 5 wishes.
Everything can be solved. The only thing you need to do is to accept it.
Right.
Our platform have attracted 20,000 people.
Living will and palliative care, they are twins.
I'm keeping this copy, and I'm going to go home and sign it.
Welcome back to Crossover, where we've been talking about palliative care, and this opens up the discussion about end-of-life planning. We're now joined by Ms. Ding, who is a volunteer with the organization called the Living Will Promotion
Association.
Now, I want to ask Paul first. Do you have a living will and trust?
Not a written one, but I have discussed with my wife about pretty much my wish as to, if I were to die, and how I want it to be arranged.
Right. It's about having this plan when you're actually able-minded and you can think clearly about what you want.
Absolutely. When we avoid the concept of death, then what happens is when you have to be, you cannot avoid it, when you have to face up to it, then the person who's really most important was not part of the discussion anymore, which is really a pity. All the other family members come in to the decision and try to come to a consensus, but the patient himself is outside of the decision.
Right. Now I want to show the audience what this organization has put together, and this is essentially the living will document that a patient will go through with their loved ones, and it basically says, my 5 wishes. And within these 5 wishes, there are aspects with regards to what sort of treatment I want. Do I want to sign some sort of do not resuscitate type of wish? Who do I want to support me? As well as what do I want my family and my friends to know? And let's see, and who do I want to help me? through this procedure and process. How do you guide a family through this? I'm going to pass out 2 copies here.
It's very private thing for everyone is to talk about their death. Death is the most private thing for every single life. So the only time we can start a conversation about this kind of document is they come to us and say, hey, I have heard about that there have an existence a document called My 5 Wills, and that provide me a choice to decide for myself that how can we face our death.
Are you advising, through the palliative care process, are you advising some of your patients and patient families about the living will?
As a doctor, I never suggest them to do, you can go to see My 5 Wishes. We just say in our own words. For example, do you ask your dad about what he wants to do, not give them a paper.
Right.
We don't do this. They have a small tree in our hospital. They call it a tree. They are
a shelf.
A shelf. They have some paper on that shelf, and the patient go to an outpatient clinic. They can pick one and read and think about this thing.
Bit of a passive introduction.
Passive one. Yeah.
So you've gone through this process yourself. You've written your living will.
Yes, I've signed it.
Right.
Also.
And so I guess what you're saying is that as you went through this process of thinking about your death or your end of life, it's helped relieve anxiety and fear for you.
Yes.
Right.
Everything can be solved. The only thing you need to do is to accept it.
Right. I guess there's a psychological peace that you can achieve by,
I think for the patient, I think also for the family. The reason is so much of the stress that the family feels and the family brings to the patient come from their guilt, their fear of guilt. And what if I didn't do enough for my dad? What if I did this wrong? Now, if everybody know what dad wants, what mom wants, then we can just cooperate.
Right. The organization was started, one of the founders is this man called Chen Xiaolu, and he's the son of a very famous general, Chen Yi, here in China. Now, he underwent a very terrible experience with his father's death, and he's very public about it. But his father was sick, and the doctors continually tried to resuscitate him over and over and over. And as a son, it was very painful for him to experience and watch. But when the doctor, in the end told him, he wanted the doctor to stop, but the doctor essentially said, well, your opinion as a son does not count because this is a leader of the country. And he said, and I dare not stop continuing to try to save his life. And it was because of seeing, I think, his father suffering and because of what he himself as a family member went through watching the suffering that he, as well as his other co-founder, decided to start this organization. His co-founder is called Luo Diandian, and we interviewed her. Let's hear what she had to say.
从我们2016年的统计，我们每一个月大概都有上百个人。来注册，在我们看来，它实际上是需要时间，而且需要反复的去考虑，所以呢，它的增长速度也许不如很多人所了解的或者期望的那么快。我相信，能够理解这个概念，而且愿意认同这个概念，暂时还没有成为我们注册者这样的人。 是非常多的。
Now, back to the living will. I know there have been over 20,000 people who've signed the will now. But I'm wondering, I mean, shouldn't something like this be signed even before somebody gets sick or is diagnosed with some condition? Like you said, you had that conversation with your wife a while back.
Yeah, I think it's do it way ahead of time. And the other thing is, I think a lot of people don't realize the patient, the person who is dying, in most cases, that would be the elderly person. That person actually, compared to the other people in the family, that person is best prepared to face the situation. When you get older, and your health deteriorates, you begin to think about death, you think about what you want, you think about the future. It is the younger people in the family, the healthy people, they are the ones who are not prepared. And so we should have the prepared person make the decision. I'm keeping this copy, and I'm going to go home and sign it. And I'll help promote this concept. And someone mentioned about educating the public and including the schools and the children. In 2006, I did a lecture about helping children understand the concept of death. And a lot of parents came, and some parents brought their kids. And they were quite nervous, those that brought the kids. They thought that it may be inappropriate for children. But you underestimate the kids. They may not understand it the way adults understand, but they need to begin to feel, I don't know if comfortable is the right word, but at least not to make this word so taboo. Something that we can't talk about. When grandma dies, you can, instead of telling her grandma, went back to her hometown and will be back in 2 weeks, and then keep lying until the kid, get tired of asking. And eventually the kid actually knows what happens. Because they're young, their understanding of this concept take a long time, and there's a process. And you need to start the process earlier so that, and you walk with him or her step by step towards a more mature understanding.
Right. For the three doctors, what do you hope can happen to help support you and palliative care?
We have endeavors that using the new social media network is that WeChat, because the Chinese people are all using WeChat. So we have a WeChat platform called Geriatric Medicine of PUMCH. So every day or every other day we will launch the articles. It's just not scientific, but in an easy word that audience and ordinary people they can understand. So we will write the stories about the ideas. So now we have our platform have attracted 20,000 people.
I hope more and more people in the society, they have opportunity to know what is living will, and they can have opportunity to contact the palliative care things. So I think living will and palliative care, they are twins. They are the same thing. They're both very important.
You're
for
absolutely
all
right.
the people.
It goes hand in hand. It's part of the same process.
Yes, exactly.
The two founders of the association that you volunteer for, their slogan, it's called Choice and Dignity. And I think those two terms are so important because I think for us, the relatives of somebody who might be facing end of life, maybe one of the biggest and most important gifts we can give them is the gift of respecting their wishes so that they can go peacefully knowing that their wishes were upheld and their relatives are taken care of. I want to thank all 4 or 5 of you for joining us today. It was a very heavy and a very difficult discussion, but it is definitely a very important one to have. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to our viewers at home for tuning in. We'll see you next weekend on Crossover. Bye for now.